Hey, hi class. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Brent here, AREC 173, Plate, Planet, and Society for this week of October 19th to 23rd. And we're today continuing Module 4 on agriculture-environment interactions, and we'll be on this next week as well. So just by quick review, the last week, we looked at this big picture relationships between agriculture and environment and the effects of agriculture on overall greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture as a major water user, agriculture as a big disturber of land and forests, agriculture having negative effect on biodiversity, and we also talked about why practice matters, right? Some specific practices that do shape the agriculture-environment interaction. This week, we're going to focus on land use specifically. So the link between agriculture and different ways of growing agriculture and its effect on land use. So I'm going to share my screen. There'll be 4 mini lectures today. And let's get started. Okay. So here we go. So this first sort of mini lecture here is going to be an issue of kind of background. The background is that the historical record, as we went through last time, is one of increasing agricultural production coupled with increasing environmental degradation. And we saw that with ecosystem services perspective, as agriculture has increased the provisioning ecosystem services, those things that we directly value and consume, but has reduced regulating ecosystem services, cultural ecosystem services, and some support ecosystem services. And so we've had the big picture has been one of trade-offs. So that's kind of our history, our legacy in a big picture. The UN modelers at the United Nations expect that 30 years from now, the global population will grow to something like 10 billion people. And those people will be more urban. They'll have higher average income across the world. And because of higher average income and because there will be more of us, we have two kind of double effect of increasing our food requirements. So estimated that approximately 50% more food will be required. And the big question is, can we achieve this while decoupling this relationship between growth and agriculture production and environmental degradation? The overall answer from today is maybe, but certainly not with business as usual in production. So I'm going to give you some more background data and concepts. So this just gives you this picture of a fairly rapid or very rapid increase in the world's population. So the first line here is sort of the beginning of my life. There were about 2.9 billion people on planet Earth. There now are about 5 billion more. So we've almost tripled in size since I was born, in number since I was born. And we'd expect by 2050 that there might be as many as 10 billion of us on planet Earth. So we've had this rapid rise in populations, and going back to kind of classical writers like Malthus thought that with this, the way that our population rises, we would be unable to keep up with the food demand generated by a rising population. And that we would have large-scale famine. The history of the 20th and 21st century so far in the world is that we have not had large-scale famine, especially since the 1960s or 1970s. So what's gone on with that? Here's sort of to get some view of that from an economic perspective. This is a graph that shows prices of 3 of the 4 major staples for the whole world, which is maize or corn, rice, and wheat. And you can see since 1980, up until about 2006 or so, there was relatively stable prices. And if anything, some price decrease for things, especially if we looked at rice. So that's quite a good news story because it showed this price is this equilibrium price, which shows that the increases in demand have been more than offset by increases in supply over that period. So it was from one perspective of feeding the world's planet and this growing population, we've been really amazingly successful. And the question is, what's happened since 2007, 2008, because we have much more fluctuating prices and higher prices. So overall, we would say that we've had this rapid growth. What happened in that first period, 1980 to say 2007, stable prices, except for this about 1997 period, but overall stable prices. Yields grew faster than population, and there were some increases in the area that we cultivated. And we can relate that to the Green Revolution. And we're going to talk more about the Green Revolution in a few minutes. Since 2007 to say 2014 or so, there were 3 major spikes in world food prices. And you can see that especially for maize prices. So 2007, 2008, 2011, 12, and 2013, 14, 3 very large rises in prices and lots of volatility or variability in prices. And then since then, there's been some decline in prices. And we might relate that to kind of, if we think about these last 2 periods, that period of instability was a period when a lot of the world's staple foods were being diverted to biofuels, and also a time when there was major instability in the global financial markets, and over time, and during that time was when global financial markets and global commodity markets, which was what sort of a basket term we used to talk about maize, rice, wheat, these major commodities became more coupled. So that volatility in financial markets meant volatility in these food markets. And what's happened since then is that because of this, this volatility and instability, that started about 12 years ago, there's been a new rise of investment in agriculture, especially in developing countries, but not only. And we'll see a little bit later in this lecture, a large increase in the area planted to crops. So, which is really worrying from the environmental perspective. I want to give you concepts about how can we kind of dig into this and understand it better. First of all, think about how do we increase production to meet increasing food needs? One way is through extensification, and the other way is conventional intensification. So I'm going to give you definition of that. Extensification means extending, right? Extending the area of land that we cultivate. So that's extending it into forests, extending it up hillsides, extending it into wetlands, right? So increasing that area when all the environmental consequences of that, versus intensification. And I'm going to distinguish 2 types of intensification, but if we think about conventional intensification, has been to increase output per unit area, and output per unit area we call yield in agriculture, by using more off-farm inputs and more new technologies. So off-farm inputs are things which we need to go into the market to buy. So that has been things like new fertilizers and tractors, as well as new technology. Some of the technologies are actually embedded in the seeds, as we're going to see in a few minutes, as well as capital like things like tractors. So we've had these 2 major ways that we've met large increases in population and food demand over time. So extensification, this is essentially a map of extensification because it shows the cropland extent back to the year 1600 is the estimation that we have here. So back to 1600, we were cultivating about 200 million hectares of planet Earth, and now we're cultivating more than 7 times that. So we're cultivating close to 1.5 billion hectares of planet Earth. So there's over the 1600 to now, we've had this large extensification approach. Note the kind of where do we have kind of some peaks. So we look at Europe and Russia and the United States as the bottom 3 of these areas. All of those kind of peaked around the year 1960, 1970, and have been going down. And if we add the world up to the yellow bars there, which includes Brazil, you can see that for the totality of the planet of those countries, so the major Europe, Russia, United States, Canada, China, India, the rest of Asia, there's been a reduction. There was a reduction somewhere around 2014, there was sort of a peak of the total area of land being used. So the point at which extensification slowed or maybe stopped in some places. But we see Africa continued an extensification scenario, as well as parts of the Middle East. And because of that, we have this kind of continued extensification. And you can see very last little peak there around 2016 is, or 2013 to 16, kind of a new rise in extensification. So if we looked back, back in the year about say 2007, we were guessing at the global scale that we would have, that the rest of the world would that the trends set in the rest of the world would also unfold in places like Africa. So you would have a slowing of extensification and a shift from extensification to intensification after that time. At this point, we can't predict that because we've got had since 2007 a new wave of extensification, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute. So this is one way of thinking about intensification, is how much land has it taken to support the food needs of a person. So you can see all of these have been declining. So this means that there has been intensification, right? So we've been getting higher yields or higher output per unit area because people's needs over that time have grown. Each individual is consuming more and more and more food per person, but each person is needing less and less land to support them for agriculture. So there has been a good news story here about intensification as well. The problem is we've got this upsurge now of extensification, and intensification still has left us with lots of damage to environment, to planet Earth. So I'm going to stop there, give you and me a break, and then come back and talk about some kind of big picture concepts that we can unpack this extensification effect on land use and intensification effects. Stop sharing.